So I mentioned the Sawby self-lock when I was talking about that Neely lock on the Timberlight a few days back. So been about a year since I had this one out. Figured it'd be a good time to pull and check it out. Oh, I love this thing. I am a sucker for a toothpick pattern, and this extra large toothpick pattern is such a phenomenal piece. Just a real grail piece. Scott did quite a few of the normal size toothpicks, which were about yay big, just under a 4-inch blade. From what I've heard, he only did like maybe a dozen of these really big ones. Super slim design, insanely tight tolerances on the lockup. You can just barely make out the seam, and it uses his self-lock mechanism, which the blade is the only moving part. You just push up slightly to disengage the lock and then start it closed, and then it drops closed with a really nice detent. Yeah, awesome piece. I picked this up on Blade Forums a few years back. Really stoked to have it. I actually printed out the patent drawings finally, so I can show you guys exactly what's going on. Like I said, you shift the blade up, which disengages it from that locking lug and this huge oversized pivot. This ball bearing has a little spring that runs through the pivot and gives you that pressure to keep the blade in the locked position. And then you shift it up and start to rotate it closed. And then once it gets into the closed position, that ball bearing actually drops into the locking notch in the blade, and that's what gives you your detent. And then you can see there's the cross section of that ball bearing. It makes for a very smooth mechanism when it's done right. This has never been successfully implemented in a production knife. Buck tried to use the mechanism on their 531 model, and it didn't go great. The examples that I've handled, they work, they function, they lock up, but they're not anywhere near as smooth as a custom by Scott. The one I had felt a little gritty and like squeaky almost when you opened it. Like you could feel the spring compressing, and there was like a little springy, I don't know. It was super hard to describe, but it was not this glass-like smooth action that you have with this one. I had a smaller one that has carbon fiber handles that was just like insanely Swiss watch smooth. This bigger one is a little heavier sprung on the lock mechanism, so while it's just as smooth, that one you could pinch the blade, get it past the detent, and it would just slowly drop open and lock up. Just, I missed that knife. I sold it to a buddy of mine who begged me to sell it to him for quite a few years after I picked up this big one, which was more my style, but damn, I still miss that knife. So yeah, that's a look at a Scott Sawby self-lock. He did this lock in quite a few different patterns, traditional patterns kind of like this. He did his combat utility knife with the self-lock, which was kind of a beefy, chunky utility knife pattern. There's quite a few of them out there, and a pattern for any appetite, you know, from utility to traditional, fancy to pretty utilitarian. They're not cheap. Probably about the cheapest you're going to pick up one of his self-lock models is maybe $1,000 nowadays, in a relatively basic handle material. Rare large model like this with mammoth scales like this one, this is probably a $2,500 knife nowadays. But you know, it's as usual in my collection, it's not for sale. This is one of my babies. You can't have it. But yeah, there's a lot of Scott's work out there. He was a pretty prolific maker, And his self-lock was also licensed to a couple makers to use. The only one that comes to mind off the top of my head is Bailey Bradshaw, I believe, also did some self-lock mechanisms. I had one of those that was incredibly smooth. I kind of missed that one too. I should hit up my buddy and see if he wants to sell it back to me. Anyways, so yeah, there you go. That is a look at Scott Sawby's self-lock, and specifically this awesome extra large toothpick that I have in the collection. So there you go.